project is very much a mirror and a window. And so I see myself in the other, which is this reflection point of what's internally within me, as much as sometimes it's a window for the other person to see into them. And it's always reciprocal, right? It's always a reciprocal experience.
I wouldn't call it the aftermath of our time together, but it's been an experience after coming back from Hawaii for sure.
Yeah, sure. But a little bit of an integrative process, right? You know.
I think there's been resistance to integration. That's what's that's
Wow.
probably
Okay, I'm curious to hear about this.
Well, I should do still an introduction because
Sure. Yes.
yeah. So I am talking with Jeremiah, and I have spoken with Jeremiah before on this podcast. And he talked to me about a project that he was working on. You talked about the project. It somehow was working through my mind to the point where I just made this really impulsive decision to fly to Hawaii and do a session with you, a photography session with you. And like I said, I don't want to say I'm suffering. I'm experiencing the aftershocks of having done that.
Right. There's many different dynamics going on in the experience itself, because firsthand that I'll lead you through kind of a meditation to where you can enter or bring your awareness to this internal state. And as you come to meet that both in your mind and within my presence, kind of just being a mirror for you to see that I make photographs of that meeting, wherever that lands, in terms of how far the person wants to look within. And that's very much what the project is it's with people, but it's very much a landscape project in terms of the internal emotional landscape that we all kind of walk around with in our daily lives. And, and it's very fascinating, interesting what shows up.
My internal landscape definitely spilled out into the external landscape during our time together. When I think back on it, there are kind of key moments, I think, that are the things that bring a lot out in me when I reflect back on what happened. I might just sort of like run through them and we can talk about some, none, whatever we want. But some of what stands out to me is, first of all, making the decision to go. And it always reflects back on me. And I think, what are you thinking that you're going to fly all the way to Hawaii to do this?
Right.
What does that say about you? And that makes me anxious. Like, it just makes me wonder about myself. Second point was, and I talked to you about this, when I got into the car with you. So I was staying on one side of the island. You picked me up and took me to the other side of the island to where you live. And looking back, I think, what was that? What woman would get into a car with somebody and then cross the island where nobody knows where she is? So that was sort of on a similar plane to getting on the plane in the first place, going to see you. The next one would be the moment where I completely broke down. And I had tried not to think about what the experience would be like. So I didn't know how I was going to respond. And it's not that that surprised me, but it was extremely, I guess, cathartic in a way. It was a wonderful release.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I felt like I was deluging you. So it's that feeling of, it's a wonderful release to let go of that emotion, but it's got to go somewhere. And so it goes into you. And that's challenging for me as far as putting that on somebody else. And then the last thing that I hadn't realized was going to be a thing was I started writing about the experience. And it was very short, but it was funny because it led me directly to where I say, Jeremiah tells me that this is the first time in a session that he has looked away first. So part of your process is we maintain a gaze. And that's one of the things that's so sort of unsettling and revealing, is that you're maintaining this gaze with another person. And you said it was the first time that you ever looked away first. And so the last lines that I wrote, and I didn't realize this was even in my head, I'm thinking, well, like, why did he turn away from me? Why am
Mm,
I the person he turned away from?
right.
And that's unsettling for me too. And that feeds a little bit back into that idea of I just dumped a bunch of emotion on you and you looked away, which you normally
Oh,
don't do.
that yeah, we
So
can
there's a
get into
lot in there.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, we can talk to that in order. I can get to that later, but
we,
yeah,
we don't even have to talk about all of it. Those are all
yeah,
the things that have struck me since I've been back. And that when I posted a couple of photos, people didn't see in me what I felt that I was feeling in the moment when the photo was taken.
right.
So my whole idea about, oh, we just need to open ourselves and people will see who we are, was incredibly naive. And I'm experiencing it firsthand now. And so I need to sort of adjust what
Yeah,
I'm thinking about. But it's not the case that just because I feel like I've opened up, I feel like you saw me, but we were together in that moment going through a
right.
process.
Yeah,
But a photo by itself is not nearly enough. It's revealing for the person and for the photographer and
yeah.
maybe for a few other people, but most people can't see.
Yeah, and it's just like it falls in the order, even though it's people and we feel like we can connect to people and we understand things. It's very much falls in the lines of art. It's when it comes to the viewer, it's going to land where they are with their own concepts, with their own ideas, and ultimately a photograph that is deeply emotional but very subtle. So it's like very much about the gaze and what's being emoted in that moment within the gaze can only be responded by somebody who has touched that within themselves. And so if they don't access that part of who they are, then it's hard for that photograph to resonate or land with any kind of understanding. So it's left with just viewing it as just the visual, right? Like, oh, that's nice lighting or the, composition and things like that. And so the depths of that emotion might get missed or skipped or looked over. It's not going to have the same impact as you viewing. It's you, and so you have an intrinsically personal connection to that photograph, and I very much do too. And I have many varied varied responses when I do share the photographs from this project. I find it goes from people just looking it over and like with no response and like, oh, okay, or people getting triggered because that emotion they still carry within themselves. And so it goes from one extreme to the other in terms of response. And I kind of make the images with letting go of any expectation of what is going to incite in the viewer and just hold space for the person I'm collaborating with. And that's my first and foremost focus, is holding that space for the person to, either attempt or accept an invitation to look in the eyes of another, to see themselves through that encounter.
It was a good learning for me, like it's just a good reminder that you can't control the outcome. And I don't know why I even thought I could, but I just had this expectation. And I'm glad I was disabused of that. I now know that is
Yeah,
not the case. I think it's interesting what you said about whether certain people access certain emotions depending on where they are relative to that emotion themselves, inside themselves. And that would just be for each individual, I guess, to kind of muddle through that. Some things resonate with them. Why?
right.
Something in them. Only they
Yeah.
can know that.
Yeah. I mean, this project has led me to explore different facets of why this encounter ends up having a powerful experience or not. It started off with this exploration of intimacy. Like, I was looking at, oh, can I explore intimacy in a non-romantic relationship? Like, we tend to only allow ourselves to be seen and known by someone we feel in the moment completely safe with, right? And so it was like, can we allow ourselves to be intimate with other people other than this one significant other? And when it came to that, and sitting in this place of intimacy, and that's very much sitting face to face with somebody, and then just sitting. I started the project just sitting and looking into their eyes, and with no words, with no questions or no lead, and just sitting in silence. And the questions in the meditation came afterwards, just intuitively, of like kind of what showed up in terms of how they're responding. And so like the question about like, where are you in relationship to your past, really came about of what I was seeing in the eyes and feeling in my body of the other when we're sitting in silence. And as that came about, it's like this encounter is very much centered around this aspect of safety, right? Like, when it's a perception, we perceive this person or this moment or this place as being safe, so we let down our guard. And in that letting down of the guard, we're letting down of those barriers we placed around our heart, like the place where we hold most sacred, right? And in that opening, we can really see and feel and emote that tenderness, right? And however that tenderness came to be, and whatever lived experience or whatever conditions of environment they lived in. And so that's very much part of the exploration. And then this other aspect of safety shows up. And if you explore that further, and we perceive safety as like being safe from danger, safety is really about being, it's like about the absence of isolation. So safety is found in connection. Within connection there's this acceptance. When you feel accepted by someone, it almost gives you permission to accept yourself. When like in reality, like in not in reality, like that's the reality of where we find ourselves in that dynamic. But ultimately in this mindful practice, we should be offering ourselves acceptance first, and not see it as a permission given to us by others.
This reminds me a bit about something you had spoken about before, which is, and I actually think about this often now, and I love it, is when you're outdoors, if you're walking through the woods, trees don't, like, there might be a crooked tree, a little tree, a big tree, a branchy tree. Trees are not thinking about themselves. How am I looking to the other trees? They're just like being trees. And it would be
Right.
wonderful if, I mean, it's idealistic and whatever, but I would like to incorporate more of that into myself, where I can just say, I'm just being me. And
Right.
I don't want to measure against another standard. I just have to kind of grow into whatever it is that I'm growing into.
Yeah, I think that's very much in the collective mind. The collective consciousness is this realization of being authentic, right? Be just authentically us, and know that's all we need to do, right? If we express our uniqueness of who we are unguarded, then we're being authentic. And that's actually all we need to do in life, because then now we're living in terms of what serves us or what doesn't serve us.
Something about being authentic also means it's not going to work for everybody. So if I'm being my true authentic self, it's going to tick some people off, and it has been. And I'm coming to terms with that. I have to accept that. And it's a little bit hard sometimes to find that balance of, well, if I'm ticking people off, I'm doing something wrong. So I need to adjust and figure out how to be more, not more acceptable, but not, yeah, and not closer to what people expect. But, is there something wrong with what I'm doing?
I kind of want to ask you more about that, is like, can you speak to a little bit more about that dynamic of when you are authentic with people that know you and that falls short of their expectations, right? Of they how they think they know you.
It's because sometimes I'm wondering if I'm just in evolution and maybe I'm just going through a funky phase where it's like things are a little off kilter and I'll find my balance again. But I find as I've gotten older, like for example, I was trying to set a Zoom meeting with someone and I had to change it, I think, 4 times because every time I either got the wrong day or I made it span over 24 hours or I got the wrong time. And then I figured out the time difference was wrong. And I just thought, wow, I don't know why, but that just feels like me. That actually is me. And normally there's a little bit of a buffer between me and work people where I have time to figure that out and I don't show because they'd stop hiring me, right? So I have to kind of try to figure that stuff out behind the scenes. But this person, and probably because he doesn't know me, so sort of that kind of, messiness for
Right.
one conversation and he was wonderful. He's just like, oh, don't worry about it, no problem. And I tried to fix it on my phone and I screwed it up again. I said, just okay,
Yeah.
maybe just wait till I can do it on my computer. And he didn't care at all. But he doesn't really know me. But when
Right.
I get times wrong when I'm supposed to meet people or I overbook myself or I'm trying to accomplish too much and I have to cancel things and I try to be flexible and I will change just about anything and I'll move anything because I need that in other people, that reciprocal, let's be flexible. And a lot of
Right.
people just, it's disrespectful to them. And I can see that side too.
Right.
But that would be an example of I make
Like,
people crazy with stuff like that.
it's interesting.
But is that me? I don't know. Is that authentic? I don't know. Or am I just like a scatterbrain for the moment?
I mean, that sounds just something like organizational within yourself in terms of how you create order in your life and
And I have a
structure. Yeah.
deficit. I have a planning deficit. I have had all my life. It's just that I used to be better at working it out where people couldn't see it. And now I'm like, you know what? I just am really bad at that.
Yeah.
It's hard for me. It's really hard for me to stay organized. It's not natural to me. So, authenticity, does that mean something I should work on and I need to get better at? Probably. But is it me? Yes, also.
Right. Right. It's like this is where you're locating yourself, right? This is where I'm at within this dynamic of being organized or planning. And then maybe you just go a little bit further is like maybe that's been your natural way, but have you found order and planning externally through your life? And so maybe this skill set hasn't been developed within yourself because maybe you had people around you that did that for you.
Exactly. Yeah, maybe that's exactly it. And on my own, it's a bit of a dog's breakfast, honestly. So that's
It's
maybe
a great expression.
I love that one.
Yeah.
But that's one of the challenges for me around authenticity is that what does that mean? I'm naturally a certain way. What am I supposed to work on? And what can the trees are not out there working on things. They're just growing into themselves. So
Right.
that idea I need to work on being better,
Ooh,
right? Like,
right.
what does that mean? I don't know what that
Yes.
means anymore.
And I think that expectation of better, right? That label of better is a condition, right? Of varied influences, right? Because if you come down to it, and I think this is part of what I started to realize after our session, which was just, I felt, every session brings me into a new revelation of these dynamics of why we hold ourselves together so tightly, and why we suppress emotions. It's this idea of goodness that was projected upon us from childhood. Like, what is it to be good, to behave, right? And a lot of that quote unquote goodness that's projected on us is the mechanism to where we learned how to suppress emotion. Because if I act out in anger, or if I act out in frustration or sadness, it's like immediately the parent goes to work to stem that emotional expression off. So they're trying to create some kind of order in their life, or a perception of goodness that's been conditioned, whether it's culturally, ancestrally, or environmental. Like every city, every country, every state has its own environment and culture, and all those influences come into play when we are kids, and this idea of goodness. And then you go into the workforce, and each company has its own culture, and then it shifts that idea of what is good or what is better. And you mix that with media and consumerism that is always selling us on convenience, to do more, to be more. And it really removes us far away from who we truly are. Right. And so I think for me, that's just what shows up is all of these are just perceptions. They're ideas, they're concepts. They're not solid, right? They're in flux, they're in play. And I think as you go into the interior, right, you look within, you start to look at your internal state, you'll realize holding in this human condition based on confronting these influences that pull us away from our true nature.
I mean, that's part of the judgment I make making the decision to come see you and get these pictures taken. Because there's a part of me on the outside that looks in and says, that's a really impulsive, crazy thing to do. And on the main part of me just thought, I'm excited to do. Excited is the wrong word, because I was a bit nervous about doing it too. But like there was a lot of emotions around going to do it, but I felt compelled to do it.
Yeah.
I really felt like this is an opportunity for me that's come up at this moment, and I need it, and I want it, and I went to go get it. But there was still this outside looking in saying, what are you doing?
Right. Yeah. I mean, for me, when we ended the first podcast, my intuition was like, oh, I'm going to do a portrait session with her. And it was just the energy. Like I could feel your energy, your curiosity, like you're really curious. One, you've been able to view some of the images and read some of the things that I attach word wise with the image I share on social media. And then in the conversation, I think it was really helpful for me because it's like I got to verbalize the experience and kind of what the intent and what's happening in the encounter and this exploration on this project. And at the end, I'm like, oh, I just had this feeling like, am I going to fly to Canada, or is she flying here? And that was like the only question I had, because I'm like, I feel like this is going to happen. So when after the podcast went live, I think it was about a week after, you reached out, and I was like pleasantly, like not surprised, but like pleasantly affirmed that feeling I had inside of me. Like my intuition was saying like, this is going to happen. When I saw the message, I'm like, there was a rightness to it. Interesting. But yeah, I was excited too as well. Like someone coming from a different country to make photographs and have this experience. So I had a little anxiousness to where I wanted at least to make it worth your while, right? And I had to do some work to remove myself from that expectation so the experience could be as organic as possible.
Yeah, no, I mean, I appreciate that feeling, and you were so gracious with me as a host in Hawaii. You were absolutely wonderful. And as far as the session itself went, that was wholly dependent on whether I was going to be open to the experience or not. That's, you create the environment, but I could have come and it could have been just a dud because I resisted it, and I wasn't willing to go through the process with you. And when I look at the photos, I had no idea what to expect. I knew what I was feeling, but I wasn't sure what it was going to look like. And you sent me about 20 or so photos. And when I look at them, so I have to figure out how to give them context so other people can at least see what journey I went on. But when I look at them, I can tell pretty much what question you asked me when,
Is
because I
that
can
right?
see how my face is changing. I'm like, oh, I know it's happening there. And like, oh, it's got a little bit better here. And then there was kind of, for me anyway, a bit of resolution, like a bit of resolve, I would say, and
Right.
some strength, I think, that came out at the end when you pull it all together and you try to sort of situate, like, where am I now in my life in this moment relative to where I've been and what I'm trying to go for, what my desires are. Where am I here? And there was a nice feeling that came through me when I, felt that. And that meant a lot. That was a huge moment for me. So that's one of the more emotional, it's one of the less emotional, I guess, looking photos, but it was one of the more, like, it felt, I got some bedrock. I felt finally like I'm like, I have my tippy toe at least on some bedrock finally
Right.
after a long time. So that felt really good.
For me, it's like I'm glad there was something that came out of it. Like it for me, this project and then the experience itself is just all I can offer is invitation, right? It's just an invitation. Otherwise, I'm projecting my desire into the moment, and then therefore is not your own. And it really, truly probably never is completely the other's own because it is this collaboration of both energy and presence. And you also have the camera involved as well, right? That's a whole separate entity that enters into the encounter. Is you have myself and a collaborator such as yourself, and then you have the camera making the photographs. And that represents something completely different, right? It's this other observer that could either represent the world or represent one other person, but it's definitely a third party in the experience. Just do my best to remove those roles that could have influence in just creating that space for intimacy and vulnerability, just an invitation for somebody to show themselves.
One of the things I think works really well is that as you're holding the gaze, when you lift the camera up, and the only instruction you give, and I think you just give it once at the beginning, is you look as deeply as you can, try to look beyond the lens of the camera. So it maintains that gaze in a way. Like, obviously I knew I was being photographed, but I kind of could get into that zone of looking away and through this moment that I was in, or this fact of being photographed. And it just replaced the gaze with you. It just works really well because as I'm looking at you in the eyes and you bring up the camera, it's the same feeling for me. I just feel like I'm looking through the camera still at you. So it works really well.
Interesting. Thanks for that feedback. I, always give that guidance of like to look at the center of the glass of the lens, but like look through it and not at the actual glass to see through the camera. And so we're not fixated on that object. And yeah, this is the first time I had heard feedback on that. I'm glad that works, in terms of it worked for you. Yeah.
Oh, I even forgot you were there half the time, Jeremiah. No.
I want to ask you a question. Is like, so how was the experience of viewing the photographs? Like there was the experience itself, and then there's the experience of viewing the photographs. Was that different from you than the encounter, or was that similar?
What? Okay, so I'll start with one surface comment. You were so gracious because I didn't like what I was wearing when I showed up. And you let me wear one of your sweaters, which was really nice of
Yeah,
you.
of course. Yes.
Thank you for that. And I had the sleeves rolled up and I was wearing shorts. So this is one of the first times I've ever seen myself with most tattoos showing.
Okay.
And it really, I really liked it. Like, I just thought I never get to see them really. Like, I mean, I can see one on my arm, or I might do, I just happen to notice or look down, but I've never had like an image of myself with these tattoos. And I'm not sure what word to use, but it made me feel fulfilled in a strange
Oh,
way. Like I just liked seeing them. It made me feel whole. I was like, that's what I've been trying to achieve. And then there they are. There's all the animals that are on the different parts of my body that mean something to me. And it felt like a more complete portrait because you could see them. So that was really nice for me. As far as it was hard to look at my face. There's no question about that. And that's a combination of a few things. That's partly age. It's not easy to look straight at your face anymore. There's a rawness to me anyway. I don't know. I'm not going to make any assumptions about what other people see, but there's a rawness to it that reflected what I felt when I was going through that experience with you. That was not as unsettling as I expected, actually, because it just made sense to me. Because I thought, well, that's what I was feeling. And like I said before, it was cathartic in that way, where I felt like it was coming right out of my face in a full 360 wash that felt um, it's like you said before about intimacy, that I have never experienced that with somebody I don't know. I have never opened up in that way to somebody that I don't know. And in fact, I've never opened up that way to most people I do know. I count on probably
yeah.
like less than one hand the number of times I've really let myself just. And I think it's because you just create an open space without any judgment. And so even though in the aftermath, I thought, what have I done to this poor man? I've just like blown him away with all of this feeling. When it's with somebody you know, or for me, I hesitate to do that because I don't want to just dump a bunch of emotion out there on somebody. It feels like you're doing it to somebody else. And it's very hard to find a space where you can do it in the company of someone. So not alone, something different about doing it in the company of another human being without feeling like you're somehow jeopardizing that relationship or putting too much pressure on somebody else or whatever it might be. So the opportunity, and I could see it as I looked through the sequence of photos, that I had the chance to just let my guard down and release whatever was inside of me in response to the questions that you asked me without caring what I looked like and without caring how it was affecting the other person, which sounds really not nice as for you, but like I just figured this is what we're in for. So,
Yeah.
Jeremiah's bearing witness and I'm just going to let it go. I left a lot in Hawaii. I left a lot
Yeah.
behind.
Yeah. It's beautiful. And it's interesting because, like, I feel similarly in the sense of, man, if I show myself to this person, am I becoming a burden to them? Right. And it just makes me think, like, in the moment of just listening to you, is we perceive these suppressed emotions as burdens within ourselves because that's what we're carrying for a long time. And then when we emote them or share them in the presence of others, we have this perception of that being a burden because that's what we've been carrying, right? And
Or because
very
you've
much,
experienced it. Or because you've
yeah,
experienced it. You have unburdened and somebody didn't want it.
yeah. And so there's the risk right there, right? There's the risk. And I think intrinsically the biggest risk and or fear that we have in showing ourselves fully to another is not to be seen, not to be accepted, not to be loved in that moment. Because then it's like, here I am in the truest form I am, who this person is, and then the other person not accept you or love you. And that's scary. And that's scary. That's probably one of the biggest fears we have is to feel unaccepted when we truly are ourselves. And so we hide that part of ourselves. And in that, we hide ourselves from the world. And and we suppress our emotions and our impulses and things like that to be good, and we suffer. There's a lot of suffering in the photographs, and it just shows like, man, we can walk around the world pretending to be these people, but the more I explore this project, the more people I work with, the more suffering I see that we're carrying within ourselves. And it doesn't mean joy doesn't exist. It doesn't mean happiness doesn't exist, because all of the emotions are always, they're all fleeting, right? There's no constant. We're in constant change. We're in constant flux, just like nature, right? Nature is living and dying simultaneously. Cells in our body are being born and dying simultaneously within us. And therefore, our internal state is in constant flux. It's just that we hide these parts of ourselves because we live in a society that doesn't allow it. Just doesn't allow it. And I think this universal growth and expansion is moving towards seeing this, accepting this, holding space for who we are in relationship to our trauma, our past, our unlived desires, and our suppressed emotions.
You're doing your work one human at a time, Jeremiah. I'm so grateful. I feel so, so lucky that I was able to experience that.
Yeah, and thank you for that. And it's truly an honor. Like, it's a sacred act to reveal this part of yourself to someone. And so I just feel honored to have had that experience with you and build this friendship I feel like has developed from it. There's a person that I've seen and also saw me. And we can get into that aspect of when you were mentioning that, like, I looked away in the session. What was that really about? Right? What was that really about? And it wasn't about you in terms of I couldn't handle the energy or the emotion that you're emoting to release. Because in holding that space, I very much empty myself, and then I feel whatever's in the body of the other person I'm working with. I feel that in my body. So I take on their emotional landscape because I become this container, right? As I hold that space for this other person, in that moment, to when we held that gaze after that, in that moment, the longest of the session. And I feel like the way I responded is I felt like the roles shifted, if that makes sense. Because I could feel the energy when I'm holding the space and the other person's entering into the space energetically. I think the gaze was held to where I felt at some point you started to hold me in that space. And in that, I was brought to my own insecurity, to be honest. Like, and the insecurity was, well, am I the facilitator, or am I, the guest? And then also it was just a perception of, I think what comes to what we talked about earlier is like, do I want to be a burden on this other person and them and being so raw, right? Like, what capacity does she have in this moment to hold me? And who am I to even question that, right? Like, if that's what you're inviting, why didn't I take the invitation? It's just all these perceptions of our limitations entering into our minds based on stories. Energy is formless, right? Love is formless. It was like, here you were giving me love back in a moment that I was sharing my love with you, and I look away. And so that's interesting for me to contemplate as well.
I really appreciate you making time to speak with me, Jeremiah. I think I needed it, actually.
Yeah. When I talked to you last time, I felt like, oh, we needed some kind of, not resolve because there wasn't like a disturbance, but like I feel like there's some closure that needed to happen, or at least a conversation that might lead to some kind of nothing's ever closed, but a level of understanding as you've experienced these waves as you return home, right? Like these waves of integration, of feeling that lightness and that freedom here in Hawaii? And can you integrate that being and embody that back at home in that environment, right? And so I'm very familiar with that experience of liberating yourself in a place and then returning into your daily life and integrating that liberation. It's a process and we all need support through it. So I'm happy to have this conversation to support you in some way.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jeremiah. Enjoy
You're
a great
welcome,
rest of your
Sarah.
day.
Yeah, you be well.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.